this week, but I'm pleased to say my MPs panel is going ahead as usual. With me this week, John Nicholson, the SNP's Digital Culture, Media and Sports spokesperson. Good morning.
Good morning, Emma.
Tan Desi, Labour's Shadow Rail Minister. Good morning to you, Tan.
Good morning, Emma.
And Tim Lawton, former Conservative Children's Minister. Good morning to you, Tim.
Morning, Emma.
Thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us and our listeners today. If we start with the reports that Downing Street believes the second wave of COVID-19 may be deadlier than the first. According to front page of the Telegraph today, more people are expected to die over the winter than in spring, although the number of deaths should peak at a lower level. The paper reports that the government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, is among the advisors pushing Boris Johnson to take more drastic action. If I may start with you, Tim, we've been warned, or we're told rather, that SAGE is warning that all of England will need to be under Tier 3 COVID-19 restrictions by mid-December. Is that what you're expecting? What is your view?
I don't know, and this is moving very quickly is the problem. Obviously, we all hope that we can avoid the whole of the country going into a major lockdown, and it can be kept on a targeted basis, problematic though that is. But certainly the increase in hospital admissions and fatalities we've been seeing in recent days suggests that it is more virulent this time than what we saw earlier in the year. So we will have to see how things go, and people must be. And this just needs to reinforce to people that this is not a drill. We have all got to take it seriously. Otherwise, this could go on for quite a while, and the lockdown will become more and more severe, and everyone's Christmas could be ruined as well. So we all need to take it seriously and do our bit.
Tan, where are you on this from Labour's point of view?
Well, look, I think the government's continued dithering and not listening to the expert scientific advice, I think it's putting us in more of a predicament. And for all the Prime Minister's avowed statements that Christmas will be fine, it will be, we will be having a wonderful Christmas, unfortunately the actions or inaction of his government will lead us to an even worse position come December time. So I think it's high
What's
time.
The inaction? Sorry, we've got tiers. People are in different areas and levels depending on the rate of infection. You could say that's the definition of action and bespoke response.
Emma, the expert scientific advice from not only SAGE but also the independent SAGE and scientific experts was that last month, so more than a month ago now, they advised the government that now is the time for a circuit breaker. But unfortunately, the government haven't taken that. We've now missed the opportunity of schools half term, where it would have been an excellent time to reset the dial and to make sure that we try to get control of the test and trace, and to ensure that our NHS is not deluged with the number of cases and the fatalities which were predicted more than a month ago. So that's where I'm saying it's in action.
Let's just bring in John Nicholson for SNP on this. Can I draw everyone's attention to this joint letter? The Liberal Democrats and Northern Ireland's Alliance Party have published a joint letter this morning, argues all 4 nations of the UK should adopt the same coronavirus restrictions this Christmas because so many people will be moving across the country. Do you agree with that, John? Of course, a 5-tier system in place or coming in place in Scotland.
I don't, as things stand. I think we need to listen to the scientists on this. And I don't think as we stand here on the 28th of October, we can be talking about exactly what we're going to be doing on the 25th of December. And every part of the UK has different requirements and is at a different stage in this. As of last night, as you know, we passed a 5-tier system at Holyrood. And so we're going to have a very different type of system operating in Scotland, and different parts of Scotland are going to be behaving differently from other parts of Scotland. So I'm not really sure how the Lib Dems can say, with well over a month to go, that we should be doing exactly the same thing at Christmas. It doesn't make scientific sense.
Well, it's about planning. They say it should be a 4-nation summit to agree a shared plan. Surely you could see the argument.
Why?
No,
but
well, the
why?
argument meaning people travel around the country in the run-up potentially to Christmas, and that it would be much simpler if we were all doing the same thing. And surely that's an argument behind the sort of things to people saying a circuit breaker.
But This isn't simple. That's the thing about COVID. It's not simple. It's immensely complicated. And the message that we are trying to give out to people is not to travel all over the country. You should be travelling as little as you possibly can in order to protect the lives not just of yourself, but of your family and the people that you love. I don't think people should be encouraged to travel.
So no approach that you would see in a national way across the UK, nationwide, I should say. Let me just bring in Tim back in on this, because I wonder, how do you find talking to colleagues of yours on the Conservative benches at the moment who argue the government is overreacting in its handling of coronavirus? So Desmond Swain, for instance, he's an advocate of herd immunity. He said this in Parliament last week: if we don't change the way in which we respond to this disease in years to come, historians will pick over how a prosperous society entered into such a devastating act of self-harm.
Yeah, well, Desmond had some quite forceful views on this, and I appreciate Desmond where he's coming from, but I don't agree with him on all of this. I think what's really important here is the government has got a difficult equation to balance. It's got to listen to the scientific advisors. It'd be nice if they spoke with one voice rather than lots of rogue advisors going off and saying, oh, it's all doom and gloom, or no, it's all going to be fine, or whatever. They've got to listen to what the economy is saying. Obviously, the forecasts that are coming out about the impact, particularly on young people, is really, really important to bear in mind. And then they've got to bear in mind what is sustainable with the public. And I think where the government's got to do better on that is being much clearer on the advice to follow, much more transparent on why you need to follow that advice, what impact it's having, how successful it's been, or not. And I think if people have more confidence that they understood what they're being told, they understood why it needs to be done, I think more people would say, OK, we get it, we're prepared to make those sacrifices and go along with it, as long as it can be seen that it's working. And when you get reports coming out saying that the rule of 6 and chucking out from pubs at 10 does not have any material impact on the spread of the infection, then people were saying, well, hold on, why are we doing that then? So why can't I have my extra 2 grandchildren together for a rule of 8 or something like that? It's got to be more consistent and clear and understood.
Are you calling for the government to publish information it hasn't shared?
Well, I think we should be publishing as much information as possible. The trouble is there's so much information. There's information overkill, and we need a consistent line on information, because scientific advice is not black and white. As I say, there are scientists who are making various different claims. I just would hope.
It's hardly helped but it's hardly helped by MPs on your own benches saying what they're saying in response to the government's approach. They can publish all the information they want, but if your MP for your area is rubbishing the idea of any form of lockdown, isn't that highly irresponsible?
Well, there will be certain MPs who will want a complete and utter lockdown, regardless of the impact on the economy, and there will be some MPs who think we should have a completely sort of libertarian approach to it. The truth is that we've got to have a compromise. We've got to have a balance between all those considerations. And I'm very sympathetic to many of my colleagues representing seats in northern metropolitan areas who haven't just been in lockdown since last week. They've been in lockdown for the last couple of months since the summer, and that long-term impact is obviously considerable, and they want to see that it's working, and they want their constituents to understand why it needs to continue, or when there's a route out of it as well. And it's those sorts of questions that the government, I think, needs to be a bit more transparent on.
And can I just say, I think Tim's right about the lack of consistent messaging. I think one of the big problems was only a matter of weeks ago, Boris Johnson was encouraging people to go back to work. And I think all of us as MPs will know from our postbags that I can say I got lots and lots of emails from people who said, I'm scared to go back to work. But with the Prime Minister turning up on the airwaves and insisting that we should go back to work, my employer is putting me under enormous pressure, and I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable travelling in crowded public transport. I don't feel comfortable about the safety measures that have been put into place at my workplace. But now, because of the Prime Minister's messaging on this, I feel that I'm under enormous pressure. So the Prime Minister has changed his message quite dramatically, hasn't he, from keep your distance to go back to work and now once again keep your distance. And I think that messaging is enormously confusing and undermines public confidence.
But you obviously could argue that he's got to react to what's being put in front of him and how the data had changed, and then react accordingly. If he wasn't doing that, then he would face criticism on the other side, you could argue.
Well, if that was the data that he's been given, but there's not much evidence that it was really. I don't remember any of the scientists saying, stop working from home and start using public transport and going into a place of work. There was never any argument from the scientists that that was a good thing to do.
Let's talk about a report that's come out from Labour. Hans, bring you back in on this. It's commissioned by Labour, written by Baroness Lawrence, that said structural race discrimination was a reason for higher transmission rates of COVID-19 in Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Doreen Lawrence, who of course 18-year-old son Stephen was murdered in a racially motivated attack in 1993, said those groups were overexposed and faced barriers to healthcare. Tan, your reaction to that report?
Yeah, I welcome the work of Baroness Doreen Lawrence, and I think her report is very timely, and I thank Sir Keir Starmer for having instigated that endeavour. I think in terms of the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, we know that they have been disproportionately affected by the virus. Within our own family, Emma, my grandmother somehow contracted COVID. She sadly left us. My brother-in-law's father, who was in a care home in Slough, he somehow contracted COVID as well, and he is no more. But even the likes of my uncle, who was a taxi driver in Slough, very, very well liked, the life and soul of a party, he also perished, and he actually was on a ventilator. So we know from personal experience across the country that that has been the case, and amongst some of our care workers, our NHS staff as well, we know that amongst those that have perished have been Black and Asian minority ethnic doctors and nurses as well. So it is very important that we look at the different causes, whether that's structural racism within certain structures, or whether it's, as was mentioned in your news bulletin earlier, the economic impact that will now fall upon especially the young and those from disadvantaged sections or from the Black and Asian minority ethnic communities is going to be disproportionately more. So it's a double whammy, and that's why it's very, very important that we look at the findings from the review and then that the government takes action accordingly.
I'm very, very sorry, may I say, for your loss and your family's loss that you just outlined and shared with us there.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, though, on this point, Dr. Raghib Ali, who's an honorary consultant in acute medicine at Public Health England, he said that structural racism was not in itself a reasonable explanation for rates differing between ethnic groups. He said it would be more helpful to focus on other factors like people's jobs and housing conditions, which I know you were coming on to in your answer there. I just wonder, how concerned are you about the wrong, if you like, the wrong reasons potentially being cited for this disproportionate effect, and you know how those things could actually confuse another message, which is very important to get across?
Emma, you're right. Look, there are a multitude of reasons which have led to the outcome, but I think that it would be wrong to say that those individuals that have alleged racism within structures, especially coming from some doctors and nurses who have got in touch. I know that the Eastern Eye did some great investigative journalism on this as well. And those doctors and nurses, their voices cannot be discounted either, where they felt that either because of a lack of PPE or being asked to go into COVID wards when they did not feel safe to do so. But the issue of overcrowding in terms of housing, I know that is prevalent, especially in inner city areas amongst many, whether it's ethnic minorities or whether it's within the white working class areas. So those are also factors that need to be taken into account. But overall, I'm hopeful that with the findings of the review that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party will implement a Race Equality Act to tackle some of these structural racial inequalities at source.
Tan Desi, thank you for that. To come back to you, Tim Lawton, as the Conservative on our panel and the party of government, of course, Henry Dimbleby, the government's advisor on food strategy, has announced a £1.2 billion plan to feed those most in need. It includes a £670 million extension of the Free Schools Meals programme. Last week, of course, Conservative MPs voted down a Labour motion calling on the government to extend free school meals over the holidays up to and including the Easter break next year. The Scottish Government has guaranteed the funding for its councils. Tim, if I start with you on this, you abstained in that vote. Yeah. You did, however, write on Facebook, the easiest thing would have been for the government to continue the scheme for the foreseeable future while the pandemic is having such a huge impact on people's lives. There's no sign of any sort of change of position, is there, from the Prime Minister? What do you make of that?
Well, I think there is going to be a change, and there certainly needs to be a change. And if there's not a change and we'll inevitably have another vote, then I will vote against the government that time. And I think the government just got it wrong here. I mean, the government did the right thing in having free school meal holiday cover in Easter, then Whitsun, then summer. No government had ever done that before. That was unprecedented. They did it particularly because schools were not operating properly at that stage, and then they took the view when schools were operating properly from September, they didn't need to continue it. But the trouble is, the pandemic is absolutely still with us and still wreaking the havoc that it is, and it's particularly having an impact on those people on lower-income jobs, less stable jobs who find themselves without a deal of money at the moment. So, in my view, it would have been so much easier and more effective, and for what is a simple and effective scheme, to carry it on, certainly through half-term and Christmas, and then we see where we are in the new year. I think what's interesting about Henry Dimbleby's report, which I think he's made some really good points there, and the response I've had from people who are on free school meals at the moment, who in my constituents, who said, look, actually, it's not essential for us, and they're rather fed up of all being portrayed as if they are incapable of being able to look after their own kids over a school holiday. And I've had people from food banks who volunteer at food banks and from Citizens Advice saying it's more than just the amount of money, it's being able to support people as to how they handle that money around providing nutritional meals and debt management and all those sorts of other supporters. Well, it needs to be more comprehensive than just, do we pay this extra money for free school meals during holidays? But the whole argument has just been distilled down to wicked Tories because they're not continuing to provide free school meals during the half term. We need to have a grown-up debate about how we look after people who aren't able to stand on their own 2 feet and how we get them to be able to more likely to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And
can I just play? Let me just play you all this, and I'll bring you all back in on this. I spoke to Mike Bird about this yesterday. He's the Conservative leader of Walsall Council. Have a listen to what he said.
No child will go hungry. We already have 365 days a year, not just term time, a crisis fund where anybody can ring a direct line number and they can get money, which is for food or for electricity or gas. And that has been actively working very well for some number of years in Walsall. So there is no hesitation in me saying that no child will go hungry because the system is there and the welfare state picks it up. But, you know, this is a political football created by Marcus Rashford. He kicks it on the pitch and now the Labour Party are booting it around.
Tim, just to get your first reaction to that, that's the Conservative leader of Walsall Council. He says there's enough money.
Well, he's got a point. I mean, of course, the focus on free school meals has taken away from the fact that the government's pumped in £9.3 billion on the extra universal credit, which is an extra £20 a week for every family on UC every week during term time and not term time. There is additional money that's gone to local authorities to provide emergency cover, be it on food, be it on energy.
He said he spent all of that, to be fair, but he was talking about a different pot of money that you can get through the crisis fund. So why do people like yourself, as he would say, get sucked into a political football match here?
But Emma, it's all money that ultimately has come from central government, and it's a question of whether it is reaching those people who absolutely it needs to reach, and clearly in too many cases it is not, which is why I've said, given these are exceptional circumstances with the pandemic, that the scheme over the holidays worked well in unison with some holiday food and play activities, of which we need a lot more, and perhaps we can have that sort of scheme, more extensive scheme, and it's all about nutritious meals as well, not just a voucher that goodness knows what it buys. But that's the grown-up argument we need to have going forward. It's not
the grown-up argument, John.
that
John
the case.
Nicholson, the grown-up argument, there is enough money there. It's just not reaching people. What do you make of that as an assessment?
Well, certainly the Children's Commissioner for England, Anne Longfield, said that money going to local councils gets tied up in processes. And we know the Warwickshire Council Tory leader said that all the money had been spent. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't be worrying about the processes. We should be worrying about the end result. And we know that as many as 2 million children in England are going hungry, and that cannot be right in a civilised country. And one of the problems seems to be just how contradictory a lot of the things we're hearing from different Tory MPs are. I mean, for instance, we know that the new leader of the Scottish Conservative Party said that he was strongly in favour of free school meals, Douglas Ross, but yet he abstained on that vote. And the 5 other Scottish Tory MPs voted against free school meals for English children. Why are Scottish Tories voting against free meals for English school children?
Some of our listeners are finding you incredibly contradictory. We've had a few messages in. Please ask your SNP contributor to cite a single example where Boris Johnson has told people not to keep a social distance. Keeping your distance has been a consistent message throughout. How can the SNP gentleman fail to understand that? And another says, what utter claptrap from your MP on your panel relating to you. There was it's some fan mail for you here. There was appropriate guidance to head back to the offices. Unfortunately, too many citizens have pushed the boundaries and thought the pandemic was over, not helped by Metro mayors like Andy Burnham. Those who follow the guidance to the letter are being punished by those who sadly don't think COVID-19 exists. What would you say to that?
Always good to get fan mail, as you know, Emma. Boris Johnson was telling people to go back to work, and the evidence was that a lot of workplaces were not safe to go back to. And we've all seen the pictures from the tube, people crushing in. He was encouraging people to go to work. You cannot socially distance in a London tube.
But he wasn't telling them not to socially distance.
Well, but if he's telling them to go to work, and the only way of getting to work is on the tube, and it's impossible to socially distance on the tube, in effect, he's telling them not to socially distance.
The point is, when you accuse people of being contradictory, and you then sound contradictory to them, there is a problem where people don't like politics being played in all of this. And I wonder how much you have to be aware of that during a pandemic.
Emma, it is absolutely impossible to give an opinion on any subject without folk who disagree with you thinking you sound contradictory or arguing that you do. That, sadly, is human nature. But equally, it makes for engaging political debate. But my message is quite clear. And I think the message of the Scottish Government was clear, which is don't go back to work if you can work at home.
You're talking then about this change of tone from certain Conservatives with regards to these free school meals. What do you say to the charge, Tan, that you just heard from Mike Bird, who's a local leader, local Conservative leader, who says this has become a political football. We're not having a debate. We're not talking about the money actually being there, and that you as Labour have just ignited this at a time when we don't need it.
I find the views of that Tory council leader absolutely shocking. It's not a case that Marcus Rashford has created a political football. The government were being advised by Marcus Rashford, by food banks, by the Trussell Trust, by other organisations, by the Children's Commissioner, and many others, that, look, we need to provide free school meals. In the middle of a pandemic, we cannot have kids going hungry. And we know that within our country, more than 1.4 million people, in terms of children, are at risk of going hungry. So it's an absolute shocking thing for him to say. And I think that, look, in terms of the government, they, just as we had the screeching U-turn last time round, when everybody, including Conservative commentators, were advising that, look, this is not the right thing to do. We need to have those free school meals for children. I think that if the Prime Minister has that compassion and he wants to have that decent response, I think that once again he will acquiesce, he will swallow his pride, because we heard during the debate in Parliament as well, many people who'd only got there because they had access to free school meals. At a time when we have rising unemployment, we've got people having financial difficulties and losing jobs, then that's the last thing something that they need to be having on their mind as well as to how they're going to be feeding their children.
Tim, just a very quick answer. How quickly do you think he could U-turn on this, Boris Johnson? When do you think it could happen by?
Emma, it's not about U-turning. It's actually about coming up with a scheme that's going to...
Okay, I'll rephrase. How quickly do you think there'll be a change of position?
There will need to be in the next few weeks, because no doubt the Labour Party, who are playing politics over this, and, you would expect them to, but at the end of the day, it's about how we can look after kids who particularly need this extra support. They'll bring back a vote, and there'll be a vote on it, and I don't want to be in a position, and I'm sure my colleagues don't want to be in a position when they're effectively voting against the scheme to continue looking after kids as we have done well up to now. So it will have to be decided in the next few weeks.
Within the next few weeks. Let me just conclude by asking, looking ahead to tomorrow, Tan, if I may, with you, the Equality and Human Rights Commission is publishing its report on allegations of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party tomorrow. The Watchdog launched its review after whistleblowers alleged that the party was institutionally anti-Semitic in its handling of complaints and within local party structures. The referral came from a number of Jewish groups, including the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and the Jewish Labour Movement. This morning, the Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, said this investigation was probably the most shameful moment in the party's history. What is your view? And this time tomorrow, it may have been decided one way that leaves the party looking like it has been institutionally prejudiced, racist.
The Labour Party has always fought social injustice. It has fought racism. It has fought against the forces that propagate anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or anti-Sikh hate crime or any other form of racism and discrimination. And I think that Sir Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner and indeed the entire Labour leadership have outlined that they are committed to tackling anti-Semitism within our party, and I think Jonathan is right that it is shameful that that our proud and wonderful Labour Party can even be connected with something like anti-Semitism. I think that it has caused unacceptable and unimaginable levels of grief and distress amongst some within the Jewish community as well as members of staff. So I am pretty sure that whatever the recommendations that come from the EHRC, that they will be implemented by the Labour Party as we look to move forward.
Tan Desi, Labour Shadow Rail Minister, John Nicholson for the SNP, Tim Lawton for the Conservatives. Thank you all for your time this morning. That concludes our MPs panel.